Good evening, everyone. Yeah, thanks for joining yet again. Numbers are looking really good today. Actually, they're still going up as well. Not too much of an intro from me. Just wanted to thank you all for joining. Really glad to be hosting another one of these. Thanks to Shaun and Nutmeg for coming forward, volunteering to give a talk. Hope you all enjoy it. And without further ado, I will pass you over to Shaun.
Thank you, George. Let me just share my screen. So yeah, thank you, George. And hello to everyone on the call. I appreciate your time and I hope you're all staying safe. So my name is Shaun. I'm based in Kent and I've been doing software engineering for nearly 10 years now. I work on everything related to the front-end architecture at Nutmeg. This is a shameless plug of 2 books I've written. Automating with Node.js, I released back in 2018. And just recently, Software Engineers Do What Now? A guide for recruiters or anyone interested in pursuing a career in software engineering. Now you've rolled your eyes, we can move on. So before we jump in, let me talk about Nutmeg to anyone unfamiliar. Nutmeg is an investment and wealth management business helping people to achieve their financial goals. We offer stocks and shares ISAs, lifetime ISAs, pensions, and just recently junior ISAs. And if you want to learn more about our products, check out nutmeg.com. So I'm here to talk about the tech, but any questions you have on the other aspects of Nutmeg, I'm happy to forward you to the right person. I think it's interesting to know how other companies tackle technical challenges. So this talk is part of that effort. So on the front end side of things, what do we do at Nutmeg? Now I'm going to cover a lot of topics and each topic could easily be its own session. I wanted to give more of a brief overview of how our architecture has evolved. Then I'll delve into how we organize our testing. If there is a specific topic from this talk you'd like me to do in the future in more depth, I'm happy to because I love talking about it. So feel free to drop something in the chat, whether it's a question or an idea as we progress. So instead of delving into what we are doing at present and what we have planned, I think it's important to understand where we started and how far we have come. So without further ado, let's start from the beginning. Nutmeg's main customer-facing web application was initially built with the Ruby on Rails framework. It was a single client that interfaced with a backend API called Web Services. Both are monolithic in nature, a single entry point for both the front-end and back-end engineers. The front-end took ownership of the Rails application and Web Services, which is a Java Spring application, was owned by the back-end. This architecture works well for a startup, but as we grow in size, these single entry points can become huge bottlenecks to work with. As time progresses and developers come and go over the years, naturally, new technologies are introduced and code grows. The front-end world moves at a very fast pace. First it's jQuery, then CoffeeScript, then AngularJS, then AngularJS with TypeScript. Now we have a situation where we have to rewrite the same feature in various ways, essentially doubling up on work and reducing productivity. For testing our end-to-end flows, for example, when onboarding a customer, editing existing settings related to your portfolio, this is all covered by writing acceptance criteria in a human-readable language called Gherkin, where it would be run on a Selenium server to control the browser and run across the entire application, ensuring it works as expected. Whenever we do development of a feature or to fix a defect, we run our branches through a Jenkins pipeline, which is a series of steps to prepare our application for delivery. Our Rails app, which is known as the Nutmeg client, gets copied to a Docker container and tagged as a version where it's deployed to a testing environment. The steps above around our pipelines have been oversimplified just to demonstrate that if our end-to-end tests fail, we cannot continue. Therefore, we cannot release our code. Our end-to-end covers pretty much everything about our Rails application. And over the years, the Cucumber suites have grown and become more granular with its assertions, resulting in 1 to 2 hours of wait time before it finishes. This impacts how many releases we can make. So moving on from that, one thing that stood out to me when I first joined at Nutmeg was that we were creating designs per project that didn't follow a set of guidelines. For example, buttons and links behaving differently on different pages, a variety of one-off colors, inconsistent icon sizes. Many of these small details and intricacies were overlooked. It was mainly focused on the designer's idea of how it should look. And if you have 3 to 4 designers doing their own thing with no communication with developers, chances are you're going to get mixed results. Pages like this still exist on our platform and are being deprecated over time. We're not 100% there, but we're very much on our way. So what problems are we facing with our monolith Rails application? So we have issues with code conflicts when working on a single code base. So we're treading on each other's toes all the time. Developers want to work with modern technology. Writing features more than once, so in TypeScript and CoffeeScript. We have release locking because we're waiting on other teams. It's becoming too large to maintain in general. Performance in some areas is not as optimized as we'd like it to be. Deployment involves the whole application every time. Plus there's the barrier of adopting new technology because of the framework lockdown. So I joined in 2017, around the time the initiative to commit our front end to migrate from our Rails monolith to React by Facebook. Deciding on a technology is always a risk, especially in front end. AngularJS is a perfect example of many companies investing in it, only to find the new version of Angular was not compatible, resulting in expensive application rewrites. React ticked all of the boxes for us. It's backed by a robust community, it's modular and scalable, and doesn't lock you into a framework, giving you a lot more freedom. It's also a joy to work with. The development process is just less painful in our experience. So the initial approach was to have 2 customer-facing single-page applications. And for anyone unfamiliar with an SPA, in basic terms, it is an app that doesn't require a page refresh to navigate between views, and they tend to load resources up front. Our sign-up SPA would be responsible for signing up new customers, and Dashboard would be the app for existing authenticated customers. We would redesign the existing features in the Rails app and port them over to the React world, but run them through the design team first, of course, who would run a variety of user testing to understand what works best for the customers. Our teams were, and they are, split into domains. So one team will deal with the investment pots, one will deal with the payments, one for the customer details, and so on. So should we migrate everything and then do a big bang release? Definitely not. We have to migrate things over iteratively. And to do this, we use the approach of the strangler pattern. To quote Martin Fowler when he visited the Queensland coast in Australia, one of the natural wonders of this area are the large strangler figs. They seed in the upper branches of a tree and gradually work their way down the tree until they root into the soil. Over many years, they grow into fantastic and beautiful shapes, meanwhile strangling and killing the tree that was their host. And yeah, it's not a fairy tale. For us, our tree is the Rails application and the seeds will be our React SPAs. And then eventually the Rails app will be no more. As you can see in this example, as part of our iterative migration, we use a feature flag approach to identify whether we should show the new React login screen, which is pictured on the right, or use the existing login screen as seen on the left. Once this feature flag is toggled on, the old Rails login screen is now inactive for the foreseeable future, deprecating its use going forward. So how can we enforce UI consistency this time? So as mentioned before, our styles in the Rails application are not as consistent as we'd like. So we wanted something, at the very least, such as a form of style guide. So me and another colleague started opening conversations with one of the UI team members. where we managed to lay the foundations of how designs should be implemented going forward, starting from the very basics. So we started with the small, finer details of the Nutmeg product. What colors should we support so that we don't have 100 hex codes all over the place? How do we define spacing in units? Plus, how do we stack and inline elements? What font and typefaces should we use for Nutmeg? What text styles should we support? What are the line heights they follow? The weights? Spacing can appear complicated at first, but it's an important aspect of UI consistency and keeping things uniform. We use t-shirt sizing for each of our spacing conventions, examples being extra small, medium, or large. Consider stack in this example, which is highlighted in purple. It's when we push elements down with margin. Our components stack down by default with margin unless we provide a no stack prop to our component. Stretch and squish are different styles used for padding, highlighted in mint green and pink. Stretch having larger vertical padding, but less horizontal padding, and squish being the inverse of that. Then of course we use the gutters as part of our grid to define spacing between columns. So, with all the foundations in place, our design system called Nutkit was born. Now we can start building components using the idea of atomic design by Brad Frost. So when we build pages now, it's like building a Lego model. We have all the building blocks to rapidly develop our user interfaces. All of our components are semantically versioned, unit tested, and reviewed in design system sessions with designers. We run it for accessibility checks too for users with partial disabilities. Collaboration is key to making a design system work. A design system isn't only a collection of the assets and the components that you use to build a digital product. It is a product, a universal language and belief system understood by designers and developers. We're now building pages at such a fast rate, and we don't waste our time on things like moving things up a pixel or two or verifying we are using the right color hex codes. Moving on to something called design tokens. This was created by Salesforce. The idea is you define a hierarchy of values in JSON that can be shared across platforms, but can also be used to white label your UI. Our native mobile teams are in the process of using the exact same tokens we do, such as the Nutmeg's iconic green. This means you define a color once, and once only, as opposed to defining per platform in the form of SAS or Android XML. These tokens compile to the format the platform needs using a tool called Theo, but all originate from a single source. So Nutkit publishes all of its components to a private NPM registry, where we import them as dependencies into our React applications. We now have a single source of truth for every UI element we use. So I can import a Nutkit button or a panel or any other component we've built as a package dependency in our SPAs. This means we don't have a duplicated component per app. So how do we look today? We've migrated a lot of functionality to React now, including making payments and withdrawals, managing marketing preferences, annual review, transaction history, and the creation of a junior ISA, which is our latest release product. So as you can see, we still have Ruby as part of our stack, but it's less prominent, and we are making great progress with the migration. Jenkins is also still part of our CI/CD process. All of our front-end applications across all the teams are written in React using JavaScript ES6. They are all bundled with Nutmeg React scripts, which is a fork of React scripts. And this is so we don't have hundreds of Webpack configurations, making them less prone to dependency failure. We are using Redux to manage state in our applications, although we are stripping it out in many places in favor of React hooks. The value is we can reduce a lot of boilerplate. We use Storybook heavily as part of our development process. It's one of the greatest things invented, in my opinion. We publish a Storybook link for every branch so that when we review pull requests, we are not just reviewing the code, we actually have visibility on what is being developed. It's very powerful. So with Jest, All of our JavaScript files have a mandatory test file associated with it for unit testing. So we use Jest and Enzyme, and we employ 100% code coverage across the board. Locky is used for visual regression in our design system, something I'll cover later. Cypress is our new replacement for Selenium because we find it's more JavaScript friendly and it runs directly in the browser. Plus we can stub DOM APIs. Finally, we use Sentry to monitor errors in our front-end applications. Errors are forwarded to the team responsible for the potential bug. So as we've evolved, we've introduced a middle layer which sits between the design system and the apps. And they're known as the domain libraries, which is a way for each team to create their own portable feature packages that can be imported into the applications. I've only listed a few of the domain libraries here to keep the diagram simple. And all of our domain libraries use Nutkit UI components to build their features. All styles always originate from the design system. What is great about having domain layer libraries is that for each feature we work on, it can be developed in isolation by the team who owns it. When we compare this to our design system, which is purely UI logic, the domain libraries, like the above, implement the business logic, involving the API calls necessary to make the feature operational. But another powerful thing is with the use of mocked API contracts, we can emulate how the UI will respond to different API payloads, or even if it fails. So this feature you can see on the screen, which is known as the transaction history feature, how will it look with only a few transactions? What about hundreds with pagination? What if we have no transactions, or if the server throws an error? Mocking these states in Storybook allows us to test the resilience of our features. All of these scenarios would also be covered with integration tests. Likely in your own experiences, you've had to log in and try and figure out how to emulate these various cases, and that is a painful endeavor. All of these features can be viewed internally by stakeholders with a Storybook link, allowing for a faster sign-off process. Here is an example of one of our new screens known as pot details. Each of these sections outline a domain library feature, and each of these are separately versioned to form a full page composition. So in Jenkins, our feature branch or our master branch will run through a pipeline carrying out the following steps. It will install the dependencies by npm. It runs linting on our Sass and the JavaScript to make sure it meets our Nutmeg standards. We run a unit testing report to see if it meets the 100% code coverage threshold. We generate a Storybook bundle of that branch. If we have merged to master, we publish an official package version. And if it's a branch, we create a release candidate. These versions are published to our private npm registry. Finally, we publish a Storybook URL that anyone can view internally. In our SPAs, when we have published a version of a specific feature, we upgrade it in the package JSON. It's good because you have control of what is going out. We can release many times a day, but it has its limits. The issue is, as releases go out at a faster rate, there is still that bottleneck problem. And there is a lot of coordination required between teams, and this is known as a lockstep deployment. Ideally, we want teams to be able to deploy their code without this extra step, and it's something we are exploring. So rather than build time releases, we're considering runtime releases. And we are looking into front-end modularization solutions such as Pyrrole, where we can develop independently without binding to a host system. It's very early days though, nothing is concrete. My colleague is working on a POC at the moment. So it's on our radar. But I'd be interested to know if anyone has an experience with micro front-end solutions, such as Pyrrole. I'd be interested to know how it worked out for you. So what does the future look like? Well, I'm hoping there's no more isolation. So that's my first hope. But we are looking into introducing Node.js into our front-end ecosystem and exploring GraphQL to aggregate data. purely speculation at this time. We are moving over our applications to Kubernetes, and we are deploying a GitOps deployment model. We're also looking at open sourcing some projects, such as our design system. And one day in the future, we will be turning off our Rails application and the migration will be complete. But I want to stress there is nothing against Ruby or Rails. I think it's a great language, and the Rails framework set the trend for other popular MVC frameworks. This is just the direction we decided to take. Okay, now let's move on to testing. For unit testing, we have 100% code coverage, which seems excessive, but I think it's a good habit. Some would say it isn't worth doing, but I disagree. There have been times where I was close to reaching the coverage threshold, where I found many bugs along the way. We use a BDD approach, so our tests are easier to read. So we use given, when, and then with nested describes. This example has been simplified. So for integration testing, we use Cypress. And for each component we have, we create a thing called a test object. Test objects allow us to retrieve a selector or trigger an action of a specific component. We can use a collection of test objects to form a page object, a common term you may be more familiar with in the testing world. Using test objects abstracts the selectors from our test suites, making it much clearer to read. Test objects are also versioned alongside their components, meaning if a selector changes, the test doesn't need to care. It just calls the selector function. Here is an example of us visiting a page, clicking a bank transfer tab using the test object, and then verifying something exists or is visible once clicked. Integration tests run against a single feature of one of our domain libraries, testing them at a more granular level. In our end-to-end suites, we still use Cypress, but we don't go as granular with our assertions. It's more high level, where it only triggers the bare minimal actions to reach the end of the entire flow. This hits across all of the domains involved, bringing it together to form a custom experience. Our end-to-end only trigger actions such as clicking a button or filling in a form. If we trigger an action and it doesn't continue at any point, then it's a clear failure. We want our end-to-end suites to be very lightweight and fast to avoid the long waiting times we experienced with our Cucumber tests. Wrapping them all in a single it clause actually provides a lot of performance benefits. And finally, visual regression is one of the things that I like the most. In our design system pipeline in Jenkins, we generate image snapshots of all of our stories in Storybook using Locky. And here you can see I tried to adjust the padding of a button in my feature branch. And my pipeline failed because it didn't match the original design. And these images are visible in the pull request. So everyone has pure visibility of the implications of your changes. So yeah, so this allows us to catch UI related bugs before they can be deployed. So what are the takeaways? And I'm really hungry right now, so I'll wrap this up soon. So keep communication strong between your peers. Evolve your architecture incrementally and not with big bang releases. Run bi-weekly guilds to discuss new ideas and raise issues with the rest of your team. Make design and development a collaborative process. It's good for PMs and designers to get developers involved early in the process and avoid the over-the-fence culture. Define good standards that everyone agrees with. Make pull requests mandatory. We require 2 approvals at least to keep eyes on quality. And just like we are democratizing wealth management, democratize your tech decisions. Thank you for listening and thanks for your time. Feel free to share this talk with your peers if you found it useful, and I'll now hand it over to any questions. So, hi Shaun, here is a big debate ongoing right now about Redux versus React hooks. What was the determining factors for your decision to completely strip out Redux in favor of React hooks? I knew this question would come up. So yeah, I totally agree. It's just a decision that specific teams have made because they realized that part of their flows don't actually need a complete state management process. All they need to do is make an API call to get some data, feed it into their UI, and then hit continue. So there's a couple of articles on it as well, which make a lot of sense, that there's benefits in both. And for me, there's no right or wrong answer. You decide what is best for your specific case. So how do you produce quality code and maintain tests when new features often require older tests to be fixed or upgraded? I guess when a new requirement comes through for some changes, we just have to upgrade our tests, and it may feel a bit long-winded at the time, but it's worth it in the long run. And do you produce less features as writing tests require equal or more time? I would say we do produce less features, but our code quality is probably stronger and more reliable for release. So we always try and make sure that we're not rushing what we're doing as much as we can. How do you ensure your tests add value and are not producing false positives? Andrew, there's a lot of questions. Okay, so how do you ensure your tests add value? The test, we determine if they have value based on code reviews, and it's simple as that. Sometimes there will be times where people will produce these false positives, and we just need to keep an eye out for it. Yeah, so how do you plan for tests? So it's mainly collaborative decisions in the guilds. So we try and define standards of what to look out for when we write our tests, to determine what is valuable and what isn't. Okay, thanks for that, Andrew. Moving on to Shaun. Have you talked about using test-driven development, and do you think there are any drawbacks? I think test-driven development, in my experience only, I find test-driven development is great for pure functions and any other related logic, but I feel like for React components, I don't see the value in writing tests first, but that's just my experience. Do you have a team dedicated to working on and maintaining the design system? No, we don't. It's a shared thing at the moment, but we hope one day that could be a possibility. How easy was it to migrate to Cypress from the Selenium world? So we still have Selenium tests, and just like we're migrating slowly, we are migrating to Cypress slowly as well. But a lot of the tests that were granular in Cucumber are actually being delegated to integration tests in the domain libraries. We prefer to have longer tests running in the domain libraries as opposed to the end-to-end test, which can block everyone. So yeah, we're still in the process of that. We have a plan in place and we are moving forward with it. How to lead a team to a new stack. So yeah, so as I mentioned, we actually have bi-weekly guilds where anyone, doesn't matter what level, can suggest a new technology or something that fits in with what we're trying to achieve. And I think it's always good to have that conversation about what you think works and what doesn't. Luckily, across all of our teams, we're quite unified in how we see the future. And that's rare, I think, because it may be down to the volume of developers we have. We're not like a huge company. So right now it's quite easy to unify decisions. Okay, and Chris says, do you have pages in Storybook? So in the SPA, it is just importing them and passing props. Having all pages in Storybook, does it not make it complicated? So yeah, so with the SPA, because our domain library features are all their own dependency packages, we do import them in via the package JSON of the SPA, and then we wrap it in like a header and footer wrapper component. and that's usually how it's done. And in Storybook, we have like a visual template which also wraps. So there's that sort of separation. And having all the pages in Storybook, does it not make it complicated? I think it could be. For example, Atomic Design, you could focus less on pages and more on templates. And I think that would probably be a better approach, because otherwise our pages will blow up in volume. George says, why did you have to write your code twice in the older app? Okay, so in the application, there are sections which are written in CoffeeScript, and there are sections written in, TypeScript. So we would have to implement a feature in one place, and because we can't reuse that code to write it in another place, then we have that problem. And that's just the way it was architected in the first place. So it's been like that for a long time. So yeah, it's not ideal. And design system evolved later stage of your migration process, or created the design system before you started the work? Okay, thanks for that question. That's a good one. So when I first joined, we didn't have any design system at all. We were building all of the components, even if it was a button or things like that, in the actual SPA. And you can see that being a problem if you have multiple SPAs, because you have a lot of duplication of components. And it was it just felt like the right time. And we started opening up the conversation with one of the UI designers. And we just got our heads together, and we just busted it out as part of another project, which actually made us miss our deadline. But in the long term, it's actually worked out really good. So Cypress supports out-of-the-box testing in Chrome. But what about the rest of the browsers like Firefox, IE11 and Safari? Okay, that's a good one. Yeah. So yeah, you're right. Only we can test in Chrome, but I think Cypress are adding more browsers support, which is great. But we also use BrowserStack to test our applications as well in any sort of browser we want, so IE11 and things like that. So that's how we get around that for now. Are we using React Native for our mobile applications? And the answer is no. We have native mobile teams. Okay. In regards to your migration, did you consider system or architecture quality attributes to justify the value of the migration? So this decision was sort of made before I joined, so it was just the direction we decided to go in. So I can't really answer that as well as you'd like, so I'm sorry about that. What do you look for when hiring front-end engineers? Oh, Omar, I really like this question. Okay, so what do we look for? So for me, I look for like a passion for what you do. So if someone comes in and for the face-to-face and they start showing me all of this cool stuff that they've been working on and that they love working on it in their own time, and the job just means more to them than just a salary, then that stands out a lot to me. And just putting in that extra effort, for example, we send out a code test, we look out for the extra things that, the extra mile they go to, which was not part of the original spec, like things like that really stand out for me. To follow up on my previous question, how did you evaluate technology choices? So yeah, so what we do is, so React was just a preference, and for me, it makes no difference whether you choose Vue.js, React, Svelte, or anything like that. We just decided to choose React. Everyone's familiar with it. That's great. But in terms of like, how do we decide on what we're going to use? So literally anyone in the front end team can do a proof of concept, like a spike into a specific technology that they've discovered. And then they can bring it as a session into our guild and present the pros and cons of it. And this has happened a lot of times. For example, we've used a thing called XState, which has worked wonders for managing a complicated onboarding journey. Kostas says, how can a small team, let's say 2 front-end, back-end devs, two front end, two back end devs allow a similar approach. Do you think it's feasible? Do I think it's feasible? Of course. If it's a small team, if anything, it's going to be easier. So yeah, definitely try and push for a universal agreement on how you do things. And AK said, we were an Angular shop. We have a reusable components library and also use Storybook. However, we now have React and Q in our front end due to some mergers and want to move to web components. Do you have any experience on this? So one of my previous companies, I think they tried to employ web components as a standard, and there was a huge initiative to do it. And I think it didn't work out because of compatibility issues and stuff like that. But yeah, I think the idea of web components is great. James Wood says, hey Shaun, I'm interested about your unit testing approach. Libraries such as React Testing Lib don't include shallow rendering and advocate mocking and shallow rendering as little as possible. Another unit testing trend I'm seeing is around reducing DOM snapshot testing. What unit testing rules conventions do your teams find useful? Yeah, this comes up quite a few times actually. It's just relying on snapshot testing is, for me, a really lazy testing approach, and it doesn't really test things properly, I think. I mean, it works in some cases, but sometimes it's like if you're expecting a class to show on a component, I would favor checking for a class name as opposed to just doing another snapshot. Plus the snapshots get so huge in size and it's just more storage space, which is a pain. So yeah, so conventions. When the PRs come through, we just sort of say, we notice things. If something's missing that we think could be a valuable test, then we just suggest it as a comment. And then usually they'll just add it, no problem. Okay, Alessio, how are you able to handle an end-to-end failure from the pipeline error to the dev fix? Is a failure at this stage blocking all releases? So yeah, so we use end-to-end to basically say if it fails, you're not releasing. And we have to be that stringent about it because we don't want to risk any problems occurring, obviously. And yes, it can block people. And yes, we have times where we have to chase people up to say, can we have some help fixing perhaps it's a back end or another team's front end change. We chase it up and eventually we have to resolve it, but that's just naturally how, when you have to work cross teams to work on the same customer experience, then you're always going to experience that. But yeah, always open to ideas on how other teams work. Why did you decide to use Learner? Yeah, so Nutkit and our domain libraries, they are all using a mono repo approach, and we have multiple packages. And the reason we use Learner is it deals with all of the versioning for us so that we don't have to go through each of them. It could be a huge pain. Yeah, and we use, I think, an independent approach to Learner. Cypress now supports Firefox. Thanks, Jake. It's brilliant. Nixon says, how much manual testing is involved in a front-end project? Is everything automatable? So yeah, so in regards to testing, so we have the pipelines that all of our branches and everything go through, and they will, if they fail, then it notifies us in a Slack channel, and also emails the original author of that branch. So the visibility is quite sudden and it's really helpful. And Theodora says, are you using Sass or styled components? And we have decided to use Sass. And it's just a preference. Both are just equally as good. And Weguria says, what's been the biggest challenge in the project? I think the biggest challenge that we definitely have right now is the micro front end approach that we want to go to. I think that's going to be a huge one, but it's going to be a very rewarding one because I feel like our development process is pretty solid and everyone's quite happy about it. It's just everyone's not happy about the lockstep deployment which we're facing right now. And once we solve that, we're going to have a very like seamless development process, which is going to be great. So yeah, I think that is going to be the biggest challenge. But also, yeah, the design system as well, I would say was a big challenge as well, because we had to really push for it and prove the value of it. And definitely everyone sees the true value of it now. Ian says, how do you document your systems and processes so that new employees can get started with them as quickly as possible? Yeah, that is a very important aspect. So we have a web documents online sort of Git book. And what that does is it outlines, it has like a checklist of everything that a new starter has to get up to speed with. And we allocate specific developers to pair with the new joiner and explain how things work in all of the different areas. And so by the end of the week, the developers sort of like familiar with, the architecture and all of the projects involved and the development process as well. So yeah, we try and get them up to speed as soon as possible. Did you consider NRWL or NX, and why did you decide for Learner? So, okay. So when we was doing the spike into how we could orchestrate the design system, as a confession, we used Backpack by Skyscanner as a rough guide to how we wanted to implement it, and we thought the way they did it was pretty good. So yeah, we went ahead with that. Okay, yeah, so as George has just said, thanks for all the questions. Let's leave it there for this week. Yeah, so I just want to say thanks for everyone attending. It's a privilege to be part of this talk, and I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to share this talk if you enjoyed it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shaun. That was great. Really, really good. Hope everyone enjoyed that. Record numbers this week. We got up to the century. So yeah, really, really good. Really informative and lots of questions there. A little bit like question time at one point, I thought. But yeah, thought you did really well, mate. So thanks for that.
Sorry, George. Can I just say, yeah, obviously there's quite a few questions. Feel free to send them my way via like Twitter or LinkedIn or anything like that. I'm happy to talk more.
Brilliant.
All right.
Cheers, Shaun. Have a good weekend, everyone. Take care.
Cheers.
Bye.